It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and your host, Chris Larry.
Hello and welcome to another episode of It's Just Business on the Hogstide Network, the show where we look at the dollars and cents of the sports media business, industrial complex, and all of its billion-dollar dealings. How you doing today, Steve?
I'm doing all right, man. How are you?
Oh, not bad. Spring, so that's nice. Happy about that.
Yeah. So I talked myself into, I mentioned this on the Hogstye, but I talked myself into yet another guitar purchase. And it was one of those things that I knew I shouldn't. Do I need another guitar? No, I do not. Do I just want this thing? Yes. And it was one of those, like, I had like the devil and the anti-devil on both shoulders going, on one hand, you don't need this. I don't need to add another guitar. And the other one was like, you got to buy this guitar. It was truly like straight out of a cartoon. And so I picked this thing up from the shipping spot. I was like, man, you need to just return this right now. But I didn't. And so now I'm happier in a sense that I've got this brand new guitar that I didn't need. That was my big week.
What kind?
Oh, see, this is my dream. See, I got an EVH branded Striped Series guitar. If you don't know, if you're not a music fan, Eddie Van Halen, who was my musical inspiration, played a self-made striped red and white guitar. Now, I am not arrogant enough to think I'm worthy of that, but he had another one that got buried in Dimebag Darrell from Pantera died. That one is in Dimebag's grave. That one is the one which is yellow and white. That yellow and white stripes. That is the one I bought. So I'm very excited about it. It's a great guitar, but again, it's like you don't need to stop buying guitars. But I did it anyway. So you have to have a little fun.
And are you not one of the, bring one in, take one out mentality? You didn't get rid of one as you bring one in?
I do have a plan because I've got guitars for different situations. A couple of them are tuned differently because if for those of you not musicians, guitars sometimes will tune guitars differently for different songs and different events. So I have enough now that they're tuned for everything. So that's how I talk myself into it. It's like you do need another guitar tuned like this. So there you go. It's useful.
There you go. I think it's been established on the show that my wife works in the music industry, and one of the artists on the roster is a fairly young woman. She's probably like 24, 25. And straight up sort of a 4-piece rock band concept. And I went and saw them a couple months ago, and I was like, does she realize she's playing Eddie Van Halen's Diver Down guitar? Obviously not the same guitar, but the same like Diver Down, like kind of, which is basically just the flag for the, for scuba divers, which was
the red and white one. Yeah.
And I was like, and I asked somebody on the management team, and they're like, well, she didn't. It was kind of accidental, but she does now because every single person tells her you're playing the Diver Down guitar.
See, that's the thing. It's like I buy. If I get the red and white striped one, which EVH brand sells, there's an expectation with that, and to me, that's kind of holy ground, and I don't think I'm really worthy of that. And when you play a guitar like that in front of anybody, that is a statement. That is
right,
a particular statement you're making, and I just don't. But the black and white one is still an EVH thing. It's still his stripe thing, but not nearly as many people will recognize it. Because they only used it for a short period of time. And again, it's buried. It's in a grave now, so it's totally gone. So, I kind of feel you. And I saw, who did I see a few months ago? I saw, Tesla. And the band that opened for him was somebody I'd never heard of called, what was the guy's last name was Daimler, Dailmer, but he had David, I think. Anyway, he had somehow the guitarist for Bon Jovi was his guitarist, Phil X, the guy who replaced Richie Sambora for some reason is playing in this no-name artist band, but he walked out there with an EVH Stripe guitar too. But like a guy like that who's a professional level, it's a little bit better. But then at the very end, when the guy walked off stage, he threw that thing across the stage to his guitar tech, like 10 feet in the air, just launched it. It was like, man, you're launching like, what he was playing was like a custom shop one, like thousands of dollars. Like, hopefully the guitar tech can catch this thing,
Yeah, no, I wouldn't want to be the guitar tech. Like, hey, I didn't ask for this.
Yeah,
Like suddenly I got to catch.
exactly. What if I drop it? Do I owe this guy a $4,000?
Right, what's the insurance policy out on my handling of the guitar?
And does it cover my guitarist throwing it
Yeah,
halfway across the stage?
oh, maybe they practiced it with some old Epiphones or
It
something.
didn't look like a bit though. He was like he threw the thing and then he turned and he walked to the singer. It was like at the end, It's like, oh wow. So, but it's funny that the young artist that you're talking, whoever she was, it didn't know what she was playing. Like to
Yeah,
me, that's like sacred to me, And she probably just saw that, hey, cool guitar, we can
yeah, it
practice.
was a cool red
Yeah,
guitar with a white stripe down the middle of it. Yeah,
yeah,
totally. All right. Well, changing the subject from the joyous celebration of musical instruments to the ongoing saga of the sale of the Washington Commanders to the Josh Harris Group. Here we are. We record this on the weekend. You're listening to this, sometime early midweek, the following week. So where we sit right now. It's been kind of a roller coaster week for sale news, right? Because the NFL Finance Committee was meeting and reviewing the sale, which meant there'll be just news as leaks and opinions of that process came out. So that was kind of generating news, and quite frankly, a lot of it by most of the big reporters on this was like, oh well, this is a weird deal. There's a lot to figure out. Like the financing is kind of a maze. The NFL's never seen anything like this because the prices are so high. Got all kinds of creative financing. 17 partners to vet. Blah blah blah. So everyone slow their roll. And there's probably lots of that are still true, and we'll talk about. And then we get the Friday afternoon news dump that we've now moved from non-exclusive to exclusive, and that they've entered in, I guess, a 90-day window to get this thing done, where we have an exclusive, negotiating basically to get this to close between Harris and Snyder, and so far as our friendly neighborhood couple, Dan and Tanya, released a statement even. So it definitely feels like we took a seriousness jump in the last, Friday afternoon.
yeah. So first of all, I'm going to read Danny and Tanya's statement here, just because. We are very pleased to have reached an agreement for the sale of the C Words franchise with Josh Harris, an area native, and his impressive group of partners. We look forward to the prompt completion of this transaction and to rooting for Josh and the team in the coming years. And yes, he used C word in the statement, trust me. So what has happened is that a purchase and sale agreement was signed. That's so. If for those of you who haven't figured it out, what was going on before was just negotiations. And it was obvious a couple months ago there was a term sheet signed. That's when it kind of became more serious that it was Josh Harris, and it takes a long time to negotiate purchase and sale agreements, especially for $6 billion asset. So that is what's happened this week. So there's an agreement because there's a period of time that it takes from when you agree to sell it to when you can actually close on the deal. Okay, it's not automatic. There's a lot of things that have to happen. The chief one of which is NFL approval. What was interesting to me is that we got a sense earlier in the week, as you said, Chris, that things weren't going kind of so swimmingly in terms of NFL approval of these things. That you got the sense that the finance committee was a bit taken aback by all this, and I do question, which we can get into, why this guy has so many partners. It's I wouldn't say it's concerning, but I just think it's interesting. But so a purchase and sale agreement has been signed. That means all the other bidders are out, but it has to close, which is not always a guarantee. I have seen deals fall apart at the last minute before. I've been a part of deals that fall apart at the last minute. I've caused them to end for legal reasons. So there's that. And then there's the NFL Finance Committee still has to approve. But so I think where I want to start here with you, to get your view is, are you concerned at all about how many partners this guy has and what the ramifications of that are? Because that does concern me a little bit.
I think ultimately my concern level on it's fairly low. And it's quite frankly a good group. I mean, just in the last week, 10 days, he added Eric Schmidt, who basically ran Google through its through its march to to Alphabet. He's kind of responsible for taking it from a search engine to Alphabet to a large degree. So, they've got this new, Honduran American billionaire. So they've got a pretty impressive group. I actually don't think that's that concerning as it is applied to the running of eventually of the team and the ownership of the team. I think that'll all be fine. I think what it says has a bigger commentary on where the NFL is at. And we've talked about this a little bit, but I think we're seeing this now in kind of, dollars and cents. And look, this is a deal that the NFL desperately wants to happen, right? Like I think one of the writers that been covering this pretty well and started, I think it was early in the week that started to break some of the details about why this is slowing down. And he said that if any other franchise, they wouldn't consider this financing deal. Like if this was the Seattle here in a year, whatever, and it was a similar deal on the table with all the masking tape and spit and glue keeping this thing together, they would be they'd laugh it out of the room, right? So it's the fact that this is the cost of a Snyder exit that is even kind of making this be considered. But I do think the NFL has an existential problem in that nobody can afford these teams, and this is a depressed $6 billion asset. Let's talk about Seattle, or let's talk about and
think about if the Steelers sold.
Yeah. And $6 billion for, broken down used car is gonna make some owners think, this kind of valuation may push a few off the ledge, to sort of strike while it's hot. So I think that's the real problem for the NFL. I don't think you can see deals that don't look like this going forward if they don't radically change some of their own rules. And I think they're going to end up changing some of their rules just to get this Josh Harris deal done. So I think you'll see some of their rules change just as they, get themselves to squeeze through this door with Harris.
Well, you're saying the same kind of thing as what's going through my head, just you're saying it a little bit differently. But that's my concern. When I said, I'm concerned about all the partners, what it means to me is that he's undercapitalized. And like you said, who can blame him? It's $6 billion asset. Who's got $6 billion laying around? So it's very, very heavily leveraged. Now, it must be said that this guy owns 3 different professional sports franchises. He owns a English soccer team. I didn't realize this until Dave Earl told me. I think it was Dave. He owns the Chelsea, I don't know what their name is, the Chelsea soccer team, and then the Devils and the 76ers. So he's got a lot of partners. He's very heavily leaned up. Obviously, he's borrowed a lot of money. That is not the road the NFL would prefer to go down. And so what I think you're getting at, Chris, is, but the problem is there's no other way to do it. If the NFL franchise values rise this much, the only people on earth who can just shell out money like that are going to be the Jeff Bezos crowd, of which there's a handful. And even those guys don't.
And I think we overestimate their ability to do it too.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Even those guys, people who don't run business don't understand this, but even the Bezos and Musks of the world don't have billions of dollars in unleveraged cash just laying around. Even if you notice, when Elon Musk bought Twitter, he had to borrow all that money. Because his net worth that you see in Forbes and Bezos' net worth that you see in Forbes is tied up in stock. Most of Bezos' net worth is Amazon stock. Elon Musk is the value of Amazon and the value of what's the space company, SpaceX? Is that what it is?
SpaceX, Tesla.
Yeah. I mean, he does have a massive pile of cash laying around, but he doesn't have billions and billions of dollars in a savings account. And so all of these guys have to go down this road. Certainly Musk and Bezos to a lesser extent, but Um, that so it's a simultaneous a good problem for the NFL to have, but it's a concern, like you said, because and mind you, the NFL has a rule that there's going to be no corporate ownership of NFL teams, and there's entities that own the teams. Don't get me wrong, but what they can't have is publicly trade. They don't allow publicly traded corporations to own things. Otherwise, you'd have like GM or whatever buying a football team, and they don't want that. So when you do that, you're kind of limited. When you have that rule, you're limited to either five people on the planet being able to buy these things, or you have a group of 15. And so I think you're making a good point. I agree with you.
Yeah, this is just the sort of new world order here. Or they're going to have to, right? They're going to have to like expand, which
Loosen up their rules.
yeah, whether it's how much debt financing can be, it's what kind of foreign national money, what kind of corporate or venture, hedge funds, they're going to have to, and that's what's so interesting to me here too, because again, this is a depressed asset, right?
I
Like
know.
this isn't, so this isn't even one that kind of it's setting a new watermark, but I don't know if it breaks it in a way. I think you see a viable franchise and a viable market, and they just so they're looking ahead, and they just like if we don't change the rules, this isn't going to happen. And let's remember they already changed. Which kind of the irony here is they've already changed the rules on the how much debt you can carry for Snyder. So so this is the Washington ownership tumult is going to push them probably past two comfortability points in terms of debt financing here. I have been a little bit surprised that the NFL hasn't stepped in and like that news that like which isn't that strange, and it was more sensational than it really needed to be. But this news that Snyder was going to sort of sell finance part of it, in this,
I
200
can tell you
million.
what that's going on. I can tell you what that is. And that's
But I'm
just my
surprised the NFL didn't step in and just say, you know what, we'll cover that, just to kind of keep Snyder out of it.
maybe. I mentioned this on the Hogstye. What I think that's probably about. There's some small part of it is Snyder ego wanting to get the thing up to 6, because he's a narcissist
Yes.
and all that. But I think what it really is, I bet you that amount, 200 million, is Josh Harris's finance people's evaluation of the financial risk associated with all the Snyder lawsuits. Because don't forget all that stuff involves the team too. It's not just Dan Snyder on the hook; it's the franchise itself. So my guess is that may be some sort of like option type payment, contingent payment, wherein if all those lawsuits and all the stuff, the liability gets settled for, goes away, then Snyder will, self-finance the 200 million. But I bet you it degrades with every lawsuit. So if it costs 50 million to settle these things, then I bet you it reduces to 150. And so because of that, I would assume then that Harris probably said, you're going to have to self-finance this because the risk needs to be on you.
It's
You
like
know,
a legal risk escrow.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. I bet you. Now that's just me. It's just a hypothesis here. I didn't read that. This is just me being in business a long time. Think it probably is that.
Yeah, I there's so many. I mean, this whole process, the deal itself is just atypical in every way you want to look at it, right? So there's nothing now. It might be the new typical to some degree, but right now everything about this deal is odd, which is why, and the NFL is sort of like I think hit the brakes on it a little bit this week. Listen, everybody wants this to happen, and the NFL eventually will pretzel themselves and create new rules just to let this
Yes.
happen. So let's not
Yes.
get ahead of ourselves. But I think they were saying what this week was like to get us to yes in a way that we can be comfortable with. It's going to take the lawyers and the accountants and the risk management people a little while here to cut through the jungle.
So I wonder here. Yeah, they have to get themselves comfortable with it, and they've got this, Colombian drug dealer guy is, now, a partner in it, and he's apparently owns a brewery, but I prefer to think of him as a cartel leader because it's just more fun. To think of him like that, but there's a lot of partners to vet. It's going to take a long time. But if I were Josh Harris, am I confident that 2 decades from now, this asset will be worth $20 billion or somewhere in that neighborhood? I mean, have they reached a plateau? I mean, is there a realistic limit above which valuation just isn't going to keep increasing at the same rate? That's the question. It depends on the economy. It depends on a lot of things. But if I mean, Danny bought the team for 800 million or 790 million, I think it was. Then he put another 800 million in it to buy out his partners a couple years ago. So he's got 1.6 billion in it roughly, and sold it for 6. And so that is a 300 and almost 400, about a 350% return rate of return. So 350% of 6 billion is going to be $21 billion. So is it going to be worth $21 billion in 25 years? I don't know. I mean, that's a lot of money. It seems like that's, even if the economy continues to grow, that seems like it's overvalued.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, who knows? I think he'll probably be fine. I think one thing that's interesting here is that one thing I predict you'll hear the NFL say as a talking point when they do eventually ratify this deal is that they felt confident because to some large degree, what Harris is leveraging in terms of this debt financing is his 2 other sports teams, actually 3 other sports teams, which are pretty good assets, right? It's pretty good collateral. So, because he's looking to take loans out against at least the Devils and the 76ers. So I think they'll say, yeah, we had to increase our, debt financing rules, and we don't love how much debt financing went into this deal, but we also understand that, this is a new watermark for deals, but more importantly, we trust the collateral assets, those 2 sports teams against that loan, and we understand that industry, and thus we feel confident that that's not going to devalue in a way that's going to hurt the loan or this sale price. I predict that'll be part of the rationale, part of their talking points when it comes. I mean, that's just a strong talking point. I mean, those are strong assets, and he could turn around and the Suns just sold for $4 billion. So let's say he decided to liquidate all of the 76ers here in the next year or two. He's going to get somewhere around that, if not more.
I'm a bit surprised. I don't know how much he's borrowed against for those teams. I'd be a bit surprised if it was a ton, because the NBA and the NHL don't want heavily leveraged assets either. And by the way, yeah, I mean, people, Chris understands this, but for those of you who don't, the reason why the NFL has debt rules, and as do the other leagues, is that they don't want Chase Bank foreclosing on a team. They don't want all of a sudden a bank to own one of their sports teams and treat it like a truly distressed asset and start auctioning things off. They want the debt to be low enough that the odds of that happening are low, and if the league had to step in and buy him out, they could. That's why. So I'd be interested to see how much debt he's taken on in the other franchises.
Yeah, same. I think you brought up one interesting point here, which is that, we talk about what the next franchise will get in this context, which is, we'll see. It'll be interesting. But you do wonder if it was just generic useless owner X was selling right now. Same record on the field, so a lot of this, but just the guy was just a dumb bad owner or whatever, or unlucky, whatever. I wonder if this franchise is selling for closer to 5 than just above 6. And I do wonder, because of Snyder needing to get to 6 and all of that stuff, all the Snyderness of it. So I wonder how much of an overvalued asset this is right now, just because everybody and their mother knew that they had to get to 6 to even get him to get lodged off this rock. So, I wonder if this was just, like I said, generic owner, if this sale price would be more like 5.2, 5.3.
I don't know if I see it quite like that. If that the asset has to sell, no matter what they have to sell, aren't you going to hold your bidding down, not increase it? Why would that raise the price?
I just think because it was so confusing about how to get Snyder out that he had enough leverage there, right? It's like
Maybe.
it's like the guy with the hostages, right? Like ultimately it's going to end poorly, but during the negotiative process,
We're gonna
he's
overpay
got
just
some
to
assets.
get rid of you.
Yeah, right. It's gonna be painful. So yeah,
Maybe.
that makes and also because what we're talking about probably months from now when we kind of get the parameters of a lot of this and it's all just like reported on post, it'll be really interesting to see that how much of the weird financing really was in this last $500 million. It really was to get you to 6.05 or whatever. All the weird like machinations and horse trading was really just to get to his number.
Oh yeah, maybe so. That for sure. Because I thought, I mean, not that I'm any kind of appraiser of football teams here, but I thought the real price should have been more along the lines of about 5.5. If you get given what the Denver Broncos sold for, and so I do think it's overvalued, and so maybe that's the case. Um, it's hard to see at this point. I think what direction that was, and we may never really know. We might not ever know. Um, the other thought I had just, of course, went straight out of my head. I hate it when that happens.
Yeah, I do think we're dealing with the Snyder tax here. This I think about that last $500 million or negotiating within that is a Snyder tax here to this process. I think realistically that the valuation is probably in the mid fives if it was an honest transaction.
I mean, basically, your theory here is that Snyder's holding it hostage, and if you want to get rid of me, I know you all hate me, but I ain't leaving until you get me $6 billion, something along those lines.
Right,
Yeah,
give me the
jet,
the fueled jet, so I can leave, or send the SWAT team in.
I want $100,000 in unmarked bills and bring it in the back of a taxi to the airport.
Exactly.
With an airplane fully fueled. Yeah, maybe. We'll see about that. I think people need to understand that you're never going to hear about these minority partners ever again. After the sale closes, all that will go away, and the only person you will ever hear about is Josh Harris. None of these other guys are going to matter at all. I've said on the show before, Magic Johnson owns a part of the Dodgers. He was the face of the sale when they were getting rid of Frank McCourt, who was as big a scumbag as Dan Snyder is, maybe worse. And now you don't hear a single peep out of him at all about the Dodgers. So that's what's going to happen here. What do you think? I'm not talking about on the field, but what do you think is going to happen with the fan base now that Snyder's gone? Does that reinvigorate the fan base? Does it increase ticket sales? Does it bring back some excitement and willingness to spend money on the team now that Satan was laughing in delight, to quote Don McLean, but now he's going to be gone.
I think it. So the easy answer is yes. The hard answer is to what degree, right?
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I think it will have like I think it's very possible that opening game, the opening home game, which is the Arizona Cardinals, so you're not worrying about the influx of East Coast fans and things like that. I think that might be their first legitimate sellout in a while, right? Right. So you'll get some initial excitement, and then they'll see it can it be sustained. I think is the most important thing, or has the years of abuse, the kind of disconnect with younger generations. Yes, the name controversy, just fatigue, just the people that have left and not come back. Like we'll sort of see, and it's even a little bit of this year will be even a little bit false because I just don't see how they're that successful on the field. And by mid-season, it'll be future of Ron Rivera, how much of it is going to be blown up. So you're not, and I know you can tell me all about the talent they have. And if this was a normal situation, you'd say, oh, their roster's not bad. It's not a normal situation.
It's not that good either.
Yeah, right. It's a glass half full empty situation. Yeah. So I think this year is even kind of a bit of an anomaly. I think you really going to have to judge it 2-3 years from now when you have not only just new ownership and a new culture, but you've started to you can actually judge that regime on what they do and how that starts to translate on the field. You won't see that this year. I mean, if they get lucky and lightning strikes and they can, scratch their way to 10-7 or whatever, it'll be huge for the over. That would be massive, because that combined with everything else might let you roll into the second half of the season with a little bit of energy, and then maybe
the fan base picks back up.
You're right. But I think there'll be initial excitement. You'll see how much that will sustain, and then it'll be everyone watching Josh Harris and see where it goes, and that's a multi-year thing.
I think the NFL, you mentioned this, I think the NFL did Washington a solid by allowing the Cardinals in particular to be a week one opponent. The Cardinals fan base it doesn't travel well. It's 1,000 miles away or 2,000 miles away or whatever it is, and so you're giving the opportunity for the team to sell out with just Washington fans. And I think many of them will return. I think a lot of it, I don't know if I will or not. I mean, I've been over that for me, but I think what you do is you market it as the start of a new era. I would even consider changing the name again, and it would take a couple of years to do that kind of thing. But the name Commanders just has a bad stink on it. It smells like Dan Snyder. The fans don't, hate the name for the most part, except for like a group of sycophants out there. I would consider rebranding the franchise if I were them. But I think you take it as an opportunity to market this as a start of a new era, and then you just hope and pray that the team starts off strong. Because if they don't, then it just falls into a morass of despair.
I think the biggest bounce they'll get, and we'll see if it's a dead cat bounce or if it's a legitimate bounce, but is that people don't have to feel gross about liking the team anymore, right? Like, and so that means you might have people that on like Sunday morning, because tickets will be available. It's not like we're not going to jump right back to the waiting list, right? So that means like in some random home game in October, early November, and the team is mediocre, and you don't have to feel gross and feel like you're supporting Snyder. Oh, you know what? Let's go to the game today, right? Like, I think just this like, you don't have to feel like embarrassed, because that's really what it got for fans, right? It was embarrassing to root for the team.
Well, that's kind of what happened.
Wipe that away.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that's kind of, for me. I mean, I was a lifelong fan of the Redskins since I was a real little kid and all of that, and it wasn't just I'm sick of losing. It was that I cannot root for a franchise that is so arrogant as to mistreat the fans, abuse the women in the building. We all have mothers and sisters and wives and girlfriends, and I just can't. So I cannot divorce myself from on the field, just pretend and lie to myself and say, well, I'm rooting for the team on the field. For me, I'm just done with rooting for scumbag organizations,
Right.
And if it's a new era, I don't like the name, and that's another part of it, and I resent the change and all of that. But I think you make a good point, which is people like me who have those thoughts with the start of a new era and an owner that is an actual professional is going to put the kibosh on stupidity and awfulness like that. That does allow people to feel a little bit better about giving their money and their time to an organization that isn't run by such a complete slime ball with a horrible business culture. So I do think that will help tremendously. Yes, I think it is important from a marketing standpoint for them to get off to a fast start.
Well,
I mean, I'm talking about
forte.
I know. I mean, it would almost be better. It's too late in the off season, but it would almost be better if Harris just totally wiped the slate totally clean. Get rid of the coach, get rid of everything, burn it all to the ground. Because this asset is such a train wreck right now. It's the worst train wreck probably in professional sports. Once Donald Sterling went away, who was a train wreck of all train wrecks, you got rid of Frank McCourt. I don't know if there's a bigger mess anywhere in American sports than Washington. And so sometimes you just got to burn it all to the ground and rebuild. And that might be where we are. So that's why I say they ought to consider changing the name again, you can't go back to Redskins, unfortunately, but something else that just says we are a totally new. That might be where if they ask me, that might be what I advise.
Speaking of the debacle of the name, because I do think we have to give him credit. This idea that Jason Wright is out there like peacocking that he should stay in the organization is just I find flabbergasting. And the idea that he would be kept. I mean,
I think
listen,
there's
I
no
know
chance.
yeah, I agree. I understand it's a weird building to work in. I understand that ultimately, I kind of give everybody the raincoat here, a little bit. But at the same time, this guy has been a full clown. I mean, I think you can blame a lot of the name nonsense, which is not just the name ended up sucking. It's just that everything about it was a
It was
disaster.
amateur hour from day
Yeah,
one.
right. So this idea that he's out there saying, like, kind of, basically like talking to the press, basically to wage a PR campaign about not only why he should stay in the organization, but he should be trusted for football operations as well. I love that Ron.
That is laughable.
I know. I love that Ron refused to comment on that Mike Jones story. I mean, if that doesn't tell you anything you need to know right there. I mean, first of all, Ron, there isn't a microphone Ron doesn't want to talk to, right? So, like, this idea that, Ron loves to talk, and he usually says stuff without thinking. So when he declines to comment, that's
I'm
a
not going to
statement.
talk about this idiocy, basically.
Yeah.
Is what you're saying.
Right. So
I think there's absolutely no chance whatsoever that Jason Wright keeps his job. You have a new ownership team in place or about to be in place. He's not flying by the seat of his pants. He's done this many times before, and he has a group of people around him who are his people who do his work. And Jason Wright is one, he's a clown who's done a terrible job. And two, he's not in that circle. So he's going to be gone immediately. I think. And like you, I mean, it's been just amateur hour from day one with this guy. Not just the name. Every public event goes horribly. He's done zero good in marketing the team in a way that allows fans to come back. I think it's downright laughable that he thinks he's going to keep this job. Now it's not unemployable. He'll be fine. He's a smart guy. He'll land somewhere else, but it's just not going to be in Washington. Whether now or 6 months from now, this dude is not going to be here.
Yeah, no, it's crazy town. So we'll see. I'm sure there'll be more news on this, obviously, as we go on. But this was a moment. You look at the kind of bolded things in the timeline going from Snyder owning the team to not owning the team, and this will be an important. The announcement of this exclusive deal will be an important marker.
Yeah, just before you move on, time-wise, I think it's going to take a couple of months still to do this. They still have to vet this ownership group. We've definitely turned a corner here, but I don't think this is going to be like next week it's done. I think it's going to take a little bit of time.
No, it'll be like a home game, like week 5, where everything's official, and they'll have Eric Schmidt and Magic Johnson and Mitch Rales and Josh Harris in the ownership box at some home game. And it'll be, I'd say somewhere in the first half of the season. And that'll be that'll be the sort of like PR moment when the network cams get like the new ownership group sitting in the box at some home game. And that'll be kind of the unsealed, the unboxing moment.
Well, I mean, for this ownership group, they may need more than one box. First of all, I mean, it may be a couple boxes.
One thing you said. One thing that is interesting, I think, in terms of because I totally agree, like the minority owners are, the limited value, except for getting you to financing. With the one exception one prediction I've got here is that Mitch Rales will be pretty influential in the stadium. I think that he will be an asset in helping to get the stadium built because of his local ties and he's gotten big projects built in the DC area. I think that's a chip in Harris's favor when it gets to the stadium.
Well, yeah, I mean, as someone who does legal work on major commercial real estate development projects every day, I can tell you need someone that knows what they're doing. There's a massive, massive difference. I've got them right now of projects run by idiots and projects run by professionals. There's a massive difference about how it happens, how smooth the project is, how good it is. And Danny, sorry, use his proper name, doesn't have that expertise. So if this Mitchell Rails guy is a developer and knows, it will go a lot better. I don't necessarily think that means that they can get the RFK site done, but somewhere, sure.
No, I just think it's political and relationship firepower. I think he will have a role in getting that stadium built.
That may be true. And I also the final thing is I think the goal will be to get it done before week 1. You want week 1 to be the unboxing, so that I think that'll be the goal.
Yeah, we'll see. Should be interesting. It'll be fun to talk about. I think that's one thing. Like obviously from a football perspective, everything will be different. But just talking about the team, you get the new owner in, and then these conversations flip from lame to fun. Where's the stadium going to be? Who is a different conversation because you feel like, listen, yeah, it may probably not be the RFK. It probably won't be the district. Everyone's going to be a little unhappy, but the story about getting to a stadium is more interesting, right? Like what's he going to do with the name? What's he going to do to repair fan related? That actually, it kind of flips to kind of actually more of a fun business story.
And more importantly, from our perspective, #content.
Yeah, that's true. Right. Speaking of content, the NFL just gave you its schedule of content for next fall. And we've talked about in the past, and we won't belabor the NFL owning 11 and a half months of the year now with these kind of like somewhat made up events. But this was a really fascinating year for the NFL schedule because this is the first year that all the new media deals kick in, really, that have come up, fruition over the last couple of years. And really last 12, 18 months. And that meant there were all kinds of ramifications to the schedule. Remember, we have a Black Friday game. They're upping their Christmas and New Year's programming schedule. Teams can play multiple Thursday nights. The rules about the networks and which league they're affiliated with didn't go away, but were loosened. So there was a whole bunch of just new variables and factors in how you put the schedule together, which is why, you saw people like Peter King even floating this idea that it may not be ready by Thursday. Now it ended up being ready, but they must have been pulling their hair out in that back room. And Monday or Tuesday of last week, they must have wondered if they were in fact going to have a full schedule by Thursday.
Yeah, I mean, it's a giant calculus problem. It's not nearly as easy as it looks, to design an NFL schedule. Okay, so there's some interesting stuff about the schedule, as Chris mentioned. Sports Business Journal's got an interesting column. SBJ Football, the NFL World Marks its calendars by Ben Fisher, dated May 11th. The lead segment in this column is about Thursday nights. And they mentioned that the NFL has dumped the everybody has to play on Thursday night rule in favor in allowing teams, or forcing them, depending on your perspective, to play short weeks on multiple times a season. And so what that has the impact of is getting rid of the bottom feeders that have no viewers, and instead allowing teams like the they mentioned the Steelers, Jets, Bears, and Saints all have two appearances. The Jets, normally a train wreck, now they've got, guess who? Aaron Rodgers.
Get to know the Jets.
Yeah, exactly right. The Steelers, one of the most popular teams in the NFL. The Bears, one of the most popular teams in the NFL. The Saints, even post Drew Brees, still big fan base. So, and then the teams that don't have any: Cardinals, Falcons, Texans, Colts. What's the common denominator in all these teams? Cardinals are a train wreck. The Texans were the worst team in the NFL last year. Although I think the Texans have a very solid marketing strategy lined up. They've got a new young coach who's a hero to the home team. They've got a highly ranked quarterback. They've got a new defensive leader. I think they're set up to grow. But the Colts are a train wreck, and the Falcons are a mess too. And so they've left. They don't leave the Patriots and the Cowboys out of this thing. They leave the Colts and the Cardinals out. That's not an accident. And I think it's part of a larger strategy. Amazon probably said, look, if we're going to pay you all this money to broadcast your product, it's so dramatically more than you've paid before. We're not going to take the dregs of the NFL. You've got to make an effort to give us better games, and it's a part of the new media strategy, I think.
Yeah, and then they've also loosened up the flexing rules, and they can't flex Thursday night yet, but that's obviously coming. So they have to keep all these things sort of like, then they have to sort of, not only do they have to program for all these new variables, but then they have to expanded last third of the season variables because they need to be able to move games at that spot. And also, it's not just a Rubik's Cube. They also want to program, they don't want to put Bengals Chiefs in week 2. You want that mid-late season. So they also have to think about, like, viewership, what's going to attract. You don't want your marquee games wiped out in the first half of the season. So it's got to be one of the hardest jobs in sports. It was already hard, but the level of complexity they added to that in this season, I hope those guys get bonuses, because that must have been a stressful time.
Yeah. I mean, and you make a good point. Is you don't want to burn out the good games in the first half of the season. It's like if you watch network dramas, there's a mid-season finale, then there's a finale, and typically, the big story drops are saved for those times. You don't want to burn out. You don't want the cliffhanger to be in week 5. The cliffhanger's got to be either at the mid-season finale or the season finale, one of those two. And it's not an accident. It really isn't. It doesn't have to do just with the weather. It is not an accident that the NFL starts its season in early September, which is historically, the NFL season is historically the kickoff of the new network television broadcast season. And that is why. And so, yeah, you want to have Patriots Cowboys, maybe, and I'm making this up. I don't know what the opening kickoff game is this year, but you want to have Patriots Cowboys like the first week. Then you want to save that same caliber marquee matchup for the end. So what your example is Chiefs Bengals. You don't want to burn that in week 6 on Sunday afternoon. You want to put that on Thursday in week 16. Week 17. Totally. Yeah. And so there's a lot of that. It is a very hard decision, job to do. Because again, I mean, and you have to let, like, the Jaguars in Washington play, so how do you bury that on the calendar in a way that doesn't harm the ratings, but yet at the same time fit, because there's a million pieces, there's 16 games a week, and they all have to play.
Yeah. And we have the Jaguars is interesting because we haven't even mentioned that another schedule complexity is that they're ever increasing international games, which is another whole scheduling, because you got to, you can't have someone go from Germany to Seattle. I mean, there's all kinds of ramifications there, and that's just another variable that keeps going up and up. And the Jaguars now, I think they're playing back-to-backs in London. And now there's even rumors that with a new stadium that they might even move to London for like a year or two. So there's all kinds of wacky stuff. The business thing I thought about, and I'm a customer, so maybe this is just me search, but they are really devaluing the Sunday ticket. I don't think that's intentional, but it's sort of a byproduct of this. Because if you think about, the Sunday ticket is only useful if you need to see your out of market, the team you're a fan of, to get their out of market games. But this idea that it's your out of market NFL viewing card, I just want to be able to watch the league, that's worthless, because they have so many games now that can't broadcast. All the international games, all these extra Thursdays, because now we got these the other thing is we've got these parallel games on Monday night and some Monday night. Think of how many games they're taking off Sunday afternoon and putting them in places where there's some kind of national broadcast rights.
And usually the best games.
Yeah, which means you don't get them on the DirecTV package. They've really devalued the package through all this. To the degree I'm kind of interested to see what happens.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I hadn't thought about that. That is a good point. It's these primetime games are typically the best games of the week, for obvious reasons. And so you don't need the DirecTV package or the what do they call it now?
Whatever YouTube
The
brand.
YouTube, whatever it is. You don't need that to see most of the big games. That is very true. And so I think in large part you are kind of your principal customer, I guess is the way to say it, would be people who are out of towners who can't watch their team. Like I used to
Yeah,
be with why I don't really claim Washington as a fan. I mean, we'll see what happens, how I feel. But point is, they were looking at people like me, and the DirecTV package was such a limited thing. I don't know if have I told you this, Chris. I tried to subscribe to DirecTV. I tried to get 2 seasons ago. I tried to subscribe to their streaming service to get the games, and I was willing to pay whatever the fee was. I forget how much it was, but whatever it was. And I got a note back from them that says, "We're sorry, you're in the wrong area. You can't. You have to order our full package." Well, I'm not going to hang a satellite dish off the side of my house. I'm not doing that. But the rule basically is you have to either be in the New York City area or live in an urban area where they judge that you can't hang a satellite dish somewhere. That was kind of the rule. But they limited their market with that. Like I was willing to pay them the $100 or 200 or whatever it was. Already. But yeah, I that's an interesting point. It's I don't know the answer to this. Maybe you do. But I guess no. Does the YouTube Direct TV package or whatever they call it, do they have the right to broadcast, simulcast the ESPN Monday Night Football broadcast?
no,
I don't think so.
you can't see that, and that you can't use. At least, I mean, we'll see. I mean, it's changed companies, but I think they'll play by these rules at least for a while, and then I think Google Alphabet will start to agitate for change. But if the game was broadcast on your, let's just call it cable, you couldn't watch it. Like you can't even watch the 4 o'clock game.
Yeah,
You
it's
can't even
blacked
watch the
out.
feed of the 4 o'clock game that's on in your local market. So let alone the primetime games, Monday, Thursday, Sunday, Black Friday. Now, because our definition of a primetime game or a nationally televised game is kind of really radically changing. So all those games, so you just can't use it as your like league watching pass. It's almost useless as that. I think eventually what YouTube will decide to do is say, because of that, because it's really not effective, they'll just let me buy my pass for my team. I don't
I
even
think
want
that
to.
would be smart.
Yeah, I'm not even gonna try to. 'Cause it's a bad experience to try to just watch the league there. So just give me my team pass.
That's not. Yeah, it's not a crazy thought. I've always thought they ought to do that because if you think about it, so okay, there's the Thursday night game, the Sunday night game, the Monday night game, and then there's your local broadcast game wherever you are, your local market game. And that's four. There's only 16 games, and so they're losing 25% of the games automatically. And then you throw in the weeks when there's more than one Monday night football game. Which there are some of those, or
Oh
the
yeah,
odd like Thanksgiving week, or the Saturday games, and all of that stuff. They're not
and the
doing
international
this.
ones. How many international games are there this year?
I don't know, but
You
some
can't
more than
you can't watch those with the ticket.
yeah. So it is a more limited thing. I do think, and I've always thought it would be a marketing boon to offer, or maybe you offer like a division pass. Maybe you can get all the AFC West games or NFC East games. Maybe that's a way to kind of broaden it. Because I think that the second they offer just one team, 100% of the people, like 95% of people would go for it.
Yeah,
Realistically. So you may be limiting yourself in terms of cost or income rather. So but you offer different, maybe you offer an NFC package or, like that. Maybe that's the way to go.
I think contractually they got to run it pretty much status quo at the beginning, but
For now, yeah.
I see YouTube and NFL. I don't think it'll be fully YouTube just begging. They'll be wanting to experiment with this because the other thing is the single game pass, right? Like, I can't watch Cowboys Eagles in my market, but I'll pay $7.99 to watch it. That's the other. I think, yeah, it's single games. Anyway, so speaking of crazy big deals. Our last story here is this guy, it's just one of those things. Is like you wake up one day and you just wonder, why is Pat McAfee in my life? Um, but Pat McAfee is in fact in our lives if you're paying attention to sports culture in any way. And he's on the move, apparently. He's a hot commodity, and the rumors, they're still kind of rumors, but he's leaving his ginormous deal at FanDuel, which is, I think, basically the giant sponsor for his, and had him contractually, had him under contract to sponsor and to somehow fund his YouTube show and other media enterprises. But apparently he's a free agent to some degree, or maybe it's like it's the franchise tag. I don't know, but and ESPN seems to be the most recent pursuer of his talents. But yeah, Pat McAfee.
I saw this in the New York Post. The title was, if you want to look it up, ESPN is leading candidate as Pat McAfee moves closer to leaving $120 million FanDuel deal by Andrew Marchand, who's a legit sports business guy, May 9th, 2023. So look, he's under contract in the middle of like a 4-year deal with FanDuel, and he's talking about just flat out just up and pulling out of it. I don't know how contractually he can do that. Maybe he has an option where he can terminate and that nobody knows about. But I think it says that he would give up that level income because it's a big deal. For an unknown, relative unknown means that he's sure he can make a lot more money. And I like the way you characterize it. Like, why is Pat McAfee in our life? I can tell you why. People want authenticity, and people want to listen to folks, by and large, who seem like they're going to tell the truth at all costs. And they come across as not down to earth necessarily, but more of kind of a regular guy. And that's what Pat McAfee is. And if you go and Clay Travis is his political stance causes a lot of people to alienate people. I'm not getting into his politics, but he's another guy who comes across as a guy who's going to tell the brutal truth at all times, and that's a big part of his popularity. Pat McAfee is like that too. Is he some kind of great NFL guy? No, he was a punter, and he was an okay punter. He wasn't a great punter. He was a good punter, but he's this. We're not talking about like Brett Favre here. Or whatever. He's just an NFL player, but he comes across as authentic and just a regular one of the guys, and they're not afraid to say whatever they think. And so I think that is his appeal. And let's be honest, ESPN needs somebody like that. ESPN is in the dumps, okay? They got, in my view, way overly politicized, way in the tank of social causes. They got really preachy, and it got really hard to watch for a lot of people, especially on my side of the aisle. I'm a conservative. Chris is not. We're the handy-eating combs of the fake sports media here. So I think, and I don't know what Pat McAfee's politics are at all, and I'm not a regular watcher or anything, but I think that is part of his appeal, and I think ESPN could use somebody like that who can relate to people in kind of a down-to-earth way and stick to the topics of sports, So that's what I think is going on here. In terms of legally how he's pulling out, who knows?
I almost wonder. I would almost guess he's agreed to give some money back. If he and to your point, which I think is sort of irrefutable, he obviously thinks he can make way more, or he wouldn't be doing this. Right?
Yeah.
So he must have it in the calculus that he's willing to write a check back to FanDuel or forfeit a bunch of money that's owed him. Something he will be giving some pound of flesh back. Now he thinks he's going to get exponentially more flesh, but I do think he will be returning some money to FanDuel.
Yeah, I do. I mean, it's not going to just be he walks away, because the damage to FanDuel is they lose a major asset, and so he's got to compensate him for the loss of the asset. So yeah, I think it's going to be more than just I surrender whatever the value of my contract is. He's going to have to pay him, I think.
Yeah, and it's not just, and this is for FanDuel, it's not just that they lose a celebrity, so to speak, or one of their assets. It's also that there's also a perception problem, because they're the upstarts, right? They're the new gambling money, they're the new money, new kid on the block. They're kind of moving, trying to get into media, trying to sort of be vertical integration across their gambling platform. And one of their major star jumping to, kind of a quote unquote old media property like ESPN. That's a reputational hit for what FanDuel is trying to do, right? Because it didn't matter how much money they threw at someone like Pat McAfee when he had the opportunity to make more money and be more legit, which I think is actually as much as anything here. Because it's one thing being even if you factor in ESPN's reputational hit, you would much rather be a content star for ESPN than you would for FanDuel. And so I think this is like it will have reputational business issues for FanDuel for just to see Pat McAfee jump like this. It's not a good look for FanDuel.
No, it isn't, but it's also, like you kind of mentioned, it's also a good look for ESPN a little bit.
Oh, 100%.
Up and coming star, all of that. People like him. Interestingly, this New York Post column halfway through has a paragraph that says the exact amount of money McAfee would earn in a deal is unknown, though it is expected to be in the range of 8 figures per year. Okay, it may be less than the FanDuel deal of $30 million plus a year he potentially would be walking away from. And then they simultaneously, I wanted to mention, they question the look of ESPN doing this when Disney just laid off 7,000 people. The parent company of ESPN, Disney, laid off 7,000 people, and yet they're going to bring in somebody at $100 million contract is potentially not a good look. But what them saying him taking a pay cut to come to ESPN is a short-sighted thing. Ultimately, it means a lot more money, a lot more influence, a lot more media presence and legitimacy for McAfee than what is still viewed as kind of an off-branded kind of secondary market sort of thing. So
yeah, and I think with ESPN it says it's an interesting tell on their strategy too, which Marchand gets in a little bit in the article too. And this is where, yes, there's optics about like firing a bunch of people and hiring one person at an 8-figure salary. But from a business strategy standpoint, what's clear is that ESPN sees more value and probably savings by investing in celebrity talking heads, whether it's Stephen Smith, whether it's the Scott
Van
Pelt, who's kind of reinvented SportsCenter for them in a positive way. It's very personality driven. You can't necessarily do that SportsCenter with any random host, right? So they're making a bet on the celebrity talking head or the celebrity commentator over reporting. Reporting is more expensive. It takes resources. It takes expense accounts. It means a story might not materialize for weeks. It doesn't feed the 24-hour news cycle. Where is ESPN cutting a lot? If they're cutting on their like long tail reporting or on beat reporters, on regional reporters, on the sort of like just like expensive business case of collecting and reporting news, and instead they're funneling into talking heads who commentary is cheap, so they can pay these people a lot of money, but then they just say spew talk, and that's cheap.
Yeah. And again, McAfee comes across as a regular guy. He comes across as a guy you're going to see in a sports bar and you can argue about the Oakland A's with. That's kind of his persona here, and I think people really like that.
Yeah, and I think that's what their other ones are too. You could start, the Stephen Smiths. They all follow a sort of archetype.
I mean, Stephen is not nearly as down to earth, but he does come across as a guy. If you saw him, you could talk about the Cleveland Cavaliers or whatever for an hour with, and it would be okay.
Yeah. All right, so Steve, kind of the quietest part of the off season might be upon us here in a few weeks, although that's kind of laughable too.
Well, yes. If there's a dead month in the NFL, it's June. Even then, though, we'll have OTAs to cover. We started our annual position group breakdown series on the Hawks Thigh, so that we will. That's when we go through. Now that we know what the roster is going to be, we're going to go through all the position groups and really get into depth and detail about their capabilities and what we think is going to happen. So that's going to occupy our time, and then we'll simultaneously have a weekly written column about that too. So follow along with that, and of course, we'll cover all the OTAs and all that. So stay tuned.
Yeah, they're hanging on every mini camp past.
Absolutely, and please credential us.
All right. Yeah. All right. See you in 2 weeks.